Hello, good evening, and welcome to the Fuse Life podcast, episode 140. It's great to see all you guys on here live. I get to see all your comments, so send some love over. The Fuse Life podcast, we're all about God-given assignments, about heaven meeting earth in and through you and me. And I am super pumped for tonight's guest because he is in his God assignment. So my guest tonight has been a politician in Parliament for 9 years. He's the first Cook Islander to be in Parliament, electrician by trade. He's been in ministry, been a pastor, ministry for about 20 years. So very experienced, and he's been a part of many community initiatives where he's changed many lives. So I'm super excited to introduce to you Alfred Ngaro. Alfred, it's so good to have you here this evening.
Joseph, it's just so good to be here, and thank you so much. And looking forward to tonight. I know you said you're pumped because just a moment ago, people didn't see, but you were actually doing exercises, you were stretching, you were deep breathing, trying to not do any palpitations in your heart. And I thought, mate, you're on.
I'm on because I believe that this is a very significant moment that we're in. I believe that what you're doing is very significant, and there is something happening in the nation, and I'm just excited that I get to be a small part of that, So,
Amen.
Boom. So just quickly, why don't we start here? You've been going up and down the country now for 6 weeks. You've been speaking at all kinds of places. I heard you were at a pub, you were at a cafe. Do you want to share some of that? What's that been like? And what do you feel the climate of the nation is like right now?
Yeah, look, I mean, it's just so great. And it's such an honor to get around and just to meet so many different people. And one of the things is that you can plan to sort of make plans, talk about things, what's happening in our communities, but there's nothing like being on the ground, meeting people face to face, hearing their heart, asking questions, them sort of in the emotion of the moment, turning around and saying, look, here's what's real for me. Here's what's happening in my community. And the other thing too is then you're able to reframe a question and an opportunity where you talk about, if you could dream again, what would your dream be? And I think that's really powerful. And then, so what are your fears? I love that when Psalm 139, it talks about that right at the end. It's a massive passage. It talks about how fearfully, wonderfully made. It talks about how all the days ordained for us are written in the book. But right at the end, verse 23 and 24, it says this, Lord, check my heart. When I hear that, that means, there's one thing that's really powerful. If you want to unpack a situation, even of people, ask them, what do they dream of? What are their aspirations? And then the second thing, it says, then Lord, check my anxious thoughts. In other words, we've all got fears. What are you afraid of? What is it that makes you anxious, in your heart, in your home, and even in your community? And when you do that with a genuine, authentic way, not to judge, but simply to be present, and because you got a heart of love, my goodness, all the goodies come out, right?
Yeah.
And the richness of what it means to be present with people.
Yeah. And how are you finding people's response to you and what's going on?
Yeah, look, it's quite amazing because people are coming from all parts of the community. We start off down at Christchurch, and from Christchurch, we went from the big city Christchurch, then out to Alexandria, and then we went to Timaru, Oamaru, went down to Dunedin, from Dunedin over to Gore, and then down to Invercargill. And the amazing thing is that all the places, especially the small towns, like we went to Wairoa, people said, no one comes to Wairoa.
Yeah.
And just because you showed up, who knows? And then you sit, you talk, you listen and hear their heart. And then in that moment, people turn around and say, I really value the fact that you heard us. And, I had people say, we're one of those statistics. We're the 600,000 to 700,000 that never vote. And then I said, well, so what's going to happen now? I said, well, I like what I hear. And for the first time, I trust what's being said because it's real. And one guy in Wairoa stood at the back and he said, I'm going to vote for you. And everyone goes, cheer. And then says, but how do I tell my whānau? And I said, well, you've been here for an hour and a half. What have you heard and what has it told you? And he simply said, I heard the heart of a man, and inside the heart of man was a heart of faith for this nation and for its people. And I said, well, that sounds like it's good enough to go. And they said, yeah, it's good enough to go. And I suppose that's the sort of comments that we're hearing from people. And then you hear some of the fears, it's been a really tough time. It's been over 5 years where, people's worlds have been turned inside out, upside down. People just uncertain of what the future looks like for themselves, their family, and even for this country.
Yeah.
And so to be able to be there firsthand to hear that. You go to places like Hastings, Esk Valley, and Wairoa, where they've had the cyclone come through and Cyclone Gabriel, and yet months after, people are still suffering. And so you're able to sit in the homes, be able to see the devastation, and then just hear the pain that people feel. For us and for me, it's an honor to be able to be present with that. But then with the honor comes a responsibility. So what am I going to do with the stories I've heard?
Yeah.
And I suppose that's where, when I'm putting myself out, talking to people about what New Zealand, what we're doing, comes into play really, and begin to talk about what we can do to make a way forward. Yeah.
So good. So why don't we go here a little bit? Like, you were a part of a party, national party, for quite a few years, and then you kind of leave, and then now suddenly you're back, and you're not just back, you're back with only 105 days to election. What went on there? What's driven you, and what do you see happening?
Yeah, look, it was a crazy time, Joseph, because look, the truth of my story is that I really had no aspirations to actually be a politician. In fact, I was just minding my own business, really. And then a friend of mine said to me, "Oh, can you just say a prayer at a National Party function?" And I'd never been to any political event before. So as I was there, and I was listening for over 2 hours, and then it was my time just to go up and say the prayer. My wife simply said to me, "Sweetheart, one job, just say the prayer." I said, "Darling, me, I'm always your obedient husband." So I got up and I said, "Look, ladies and gentlemen, my job is just to say the prayer. But I thought I just want to say one thing. All night I've heard left, right, red, blue, Labour, National, policy for this, policy for that, and why you should support what we're doing." And I said, "But it's uninspiring because I haven't heard a vision that captures the dreams and aspirations for me, my family, and even my community. It's uninspiring because I haven't heard a set of values that capture that vision and help to guide it along." And so because of that, I like to say a prayer like this. And I said, let's not close our eyes. And I simply said, "Father God, I just pray that you would open the eyes of the heart of our political leaders of our nation, that they would see us as we see them. They would look and they would see the aspirations and the dreams that we have. And could they be old school enough they could mean what they say what they mean, and could their word be their bond? And if they didn't get it right, could they have the courage to come back and say, we failed, we didn't get there." And in Jesus' name we said amen. And you know what happened? I got a standing ovation. I thought I was going to get kicked out.
Yeah.
But John Key came across and he just said, "You should be in Parliament." And that was the beginning of my time of 9 years of being, in politics and being part of the National Party. So I served my time there. But the truth of the tale was that I also then, near the last 3 years, started standing up even more so for the things that I believed in, things that I didn't agree with that were happening, in our country, especially in the lawmakers, which is what Parliament was about. I stood up against euthanasia, along with 36,000 submissions, the largest of any bill at that time. And 90% of the submissions said, this bill was unsafe and opposed the bill. I stood up against abortion law reforms. Again, many submissions, people saying, this has gone too far. It's quite liberal. And if anything, it was actually then questioning the whole living being of the fetus inside the womb, supposedly the safest place, for a child. And so when I stood up for that, people said, "Oh, you're a conviction politician." I said, "Well, what does that mean?" It means you stand up for what you believe in. So anyway, in the end, I became a bit of a thorn in the flesh, the people in the shoe of my own party, and got pushed out. So I actually got, pushed down the list. And in 2020, I was one of those MPs that didn't make it back in. And we weren't going to do anything. In fact, my wife and I thought, we set up Intercessors Aotearoa. We're praying for the nation, looking after our whānau and our family as well. But, you're right, only 105 days out, I just felt in my own faith journey, I felt God just press on my heart. And the first thing he did, he said, "Joseph, let it go." And I knew what it was. I'd made a vow that I was never coming back to Parliament again. It cost me too much. My family time, my time with my wife, my time with my grandchildren, and even my children. And also too, when you're in that public square, my goodness, the allegations and the ridicule you get, all the time. And yet God knew that I had made that vow, and so I had to rescind that vow. I had to let it go again. And as soon as I just began to weep. And I was weeping because what God had done then, he put inside of me his love for this nation and for its people. And the truth is, it's unshakable because it comes from him.
Yeah.
And so with that, and speaking to my wife, I said to her, look, God's calling us to run back at that mountain. Even as impossible as it look, run back at that giant where people say, look, there's no way, 105 days, you just can't do it. So that's our why that we're heading back, because we really believe God's heart, his love for this nation and his people wants to be expressed through the realm of politics.
Yeah. Wow. And so 105 days, definitely most people would say impossible. But, you know, a week ago, I think New Zealand polled 1%, right? And there's some people running for a year, haven't hit 1%. They've been, you could call it miracle after miracle to come to this point. Do you want to touch on that a little bit? Anything that's happened that's made you go, wow, like, okay.
Yeah, look, a lot of times people say, you know, you're too small and you're too late. You know, and the truth is that, you know, when it comes to being size, MMP was made for big and small. So in actual fact, we've had 3 years of one party rule. We voted that out in 1994 with a referendum. And so since 1996, we've had MMP elections. And MMP has allowing for smaller parties to hold a bigger party to account. And so therefore we have these coalitions. So it's not about size. When people say, you know, you're too late, you know, you don't have enough time. Well, one day in politics is a long time. You can start off as a rooster, you know, crowing on the fence, telling us about your policies. You can finish the day as a feather duster, right? And that's it, you know, everything's done. You know, a good example is that in 2002, Peter Dunn was at a one-man party, and basically he wasn't going anywhere. But what they say is with a week out to the election, he got a moment in time to speak through all the political noise and just resonate a sound of truth and of hope. And it was to do with the family. He talked about the family commission. He talked about families being so important to be a foundation of this nation. And within that short period of time, he went from 1 to 9. So I believe that the heart of a nation already has in its DNA this imprint that when it hears the sound of hope, right, it just activates something.
Yeah.
And that's what we're seeing now as we're traveling around the country. We're just seeing this igniting hope again in the hearts of people.
That's so good. I think one of my challenges since COVID and what happened there in the next 3 years was to see hope get destroyed. You know, I remember the first level 4 lockdown. I was walking up and down my street, just feeling the oppression in the atmosphere and the fear. And I had a lady cross the road who was like 800 meters away from me. And it was just really weird what was happening. And so when we hear hope, I guess the human spirit just starts to leap because we were built for that, you know. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, what I love about being Kiwi, and Kiwis are made of pioneers who've come from different countries, whether you're a pioneer from old or a pioneer of new. You know, you have to come a long way, right? We're the bottom of the earth, right? Surrounded by water.
Yeah.
And when you do get here, so therefore you have this thing called a pioneer spirit. And pioneers are innovators, you know, they're risk takers. You know, that's inside of us. You know, if you think about the history of old, you know, we're the Kiwis that climb mountains where no one else could climb them. You know, it's Edmund Hillary. We're the ones that can split adamants, you know, Ernest Rutherford, right? Because that's what we do. It's inside of us to innovate, you know, these ideas. And we're the ones that push, you know, punch well above our weight. I mean, America's Cup is another classic modern day example when you've got all the big boys with the big money and all the technology, and here come the Kiwis again, right?
Yeah.
Out of nothing, we make the impossible happen.
Yep.
And so for me, you know, I think that's really important. We have to be careful, though. It feels like we're trying to push that down and suppress that. You know, we're trying to sort of have different values where, you know, it's not about being competitive, and it's not about, you know, we just got to, it's okay if you don't get there. Well, no, that's who we are. You know, we work hard, we work smart. We do want to win. We do want to get ahead. And there's nothing wrong with good, healthy competition.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I just want to go into your assignment conversation a little bit here. You know, we talk about assignments and we talk about maturing into them, being prepared for them. And I remember hearing you talk about going into Parliament and grabbing the broom and making cups of tea. Can you touch on that a little bit, the importance of having a heart of service?
Yeah, look, one of the things that, people said to me, what are you going to do first when you go into Parliament? And I said, well, when I was an apprentice electrician, the very first job I was given was a broom. That's right. It's about as basic as you get, right? And your job is just to sweep the floor. The second job is to make a cup of tea for everyone. And so I just felt that, well, went there and I just, served people. And what was amazing, Joseph, there's 120 MPs there, right? Everyone's competing. Believe it or not, there's ego in there. I know you're trying to say, really? Are you sure? Not Parliament. And believe it or not, there's heaps of ambition, right? And there's a lot of agendas, right? Some of them quite hidden, but everyone's sort of competing, trying to get ahead. And yet what I did is that when I went in there, the very first thing I did was actually just to turn around and serve. And what was amazing is that people then saw, oh, this guy doesn't have an agenda, right? But what he wants to do is serve. And so doors opened. Doors into being able to go into the Minister of Finance's office to be able to learn how fiscal financial responsibility, happened, to go into the Ministry of Education and Health, Infrastructure and Roading. And why? Because when you take an approach of humility, when you take an approach of look, learn and listen, then doors open. Yeah.
So good. I think that's an element that maybe believers kind of ignore sometimes, is the competence element that I think is very important. It's one thing when your gift makes room for you, but then it's your competence that will keep you in a place, right? And so obviously we've seen your experience and all this competence that you now carry to walk in this position. And I think that's what gets us excited, Another thing that really hits me is I hear you speak and I hear a man. I don't hear a portrayal of something, trying to sell something, trying to appear as something. It's blown my mind, even our conversations just in passing, just that humility. So I'm glad you touched on that ego. But I want to just touch on a couple of stories that I heard in one of your podcasts around the fact that you decided that you were going to be humble enough to have people around you that you're accountable to, even your children. I think that that's a big deal. It says a lot about your leadership. And the other part that really hit me was you said that you would talk to the cleaners and you knew their name and they knew you and you built relationship and changed the culture. Can we talk a little bit about the culture of humility? Because politics, I think, has a real bad feeling in most people's mouths because that culture is very different, definitely not humility.
Yeah, one of the things I believe is really important, and I remember someone saying that, if you say you're a leader and then you go for a walk and you turn around and there's no one behind you, then you're just a guy going for a walk, right? But if you say you're a leader and you turn around and there are people going with you in a direction, then that's leadership. And the question for me is then how do you create leadership? And it's creating a culture of two things, of trust and of confidence. People need to know they can trust you. And to be honest, trust is an emotional word. It's an instinct. It means that they know you're genuine, you care for them. And so I made sure that I held accountability. So my children used to talk to me all the time. I mean, they'd say some funny things. Dad, whatever you do, stop telling all those dad jokes, So I'd always tell them, because it was a good thing. And then they say things, oh, Dad, look, we know you didn't dress yourself because, Mum didn't dress you right now because you're not looking good. So you have these funny moments, but it's about making sure that actually your family are a part of the journey. And we're big on family.
Yeah.
And it's really important. And then you have accountability of people around you because it doesn't matter who you are or where you've been, right? You've got to keep yourself grounded. You've got to have an accountability. So I made sure that I had people that I trusted and people who didn't just, say what I wanted to hear. I needed to have people around me who could speak into my life, who could see that, if I was going astray, I had to give them the permission to be able to do that. And that was really important.
Wow.
And then the other thing was, I did when I went into Parliament, I started knowing the cleaners, the security guys, and, it was just natural really, because I wanted it to become like part of a community that I knew and created that culture of trust and confidence. Joseph, there was a time too when a lot of them, I sort of became like the de facto, pastor of Parliament, right? They come in and knock on my door and it goes, and they want to share their stories, share their heart about what they've been going through and maybe about their family. I'd say a prayer, or in some cases I needed to help them out It could have been, just with some practical things that I could do as an MP. But lots of times just got to know the people. Used to play for the parliamentary rugby team.
Okay.
And that was really good because you had all different guys. You had guys on security as well. And
Wow.
and it's quite funny because then they'd see me as an MP, not afraid to get in there, and to be involved in that, because we'd do fundraising. That's part of that that parliamentary rugby team was actually traveling around the country. And so all of those things were just part of being part of this culture, part of this family. And I got to tell you, some of my colleagues said, "Is this real? Are you real?" And I said, "Yeah, man, it's real." And it doesn't take much, right? Seriously, a couple of minutes out of your day just to say, "Hey, Joseph, hey, how's the family going?
Yeah.
How's your daughters?" And when you do that, then you're genuine, you're connecting. And here's the benefits too. When you want to do things, like I needed some stuff done around, putting some paintings on the wall, and all my other colleagues could never get anything done. Guess what? Mine always got done first.
Wow. Favor. Awesome.
Yeah. I love that.
Politics 101 can't teach you authenticity, either you are or you're not.
Yeah.
And it's very obvious.
Yeah.
And yeah, this is amazing. And if you were an athlete, I guess they would call you the people's champ, you're the people's guy. And I think that's something that a lot of leaders have forgotten, that they're here to serve the people, not the other way around, So I really value that.
Yeah.
I want to say something else. You talked about this prayer that you did the first time, and you mentioned in there that if you fail, it's okay, as long as you come and apologize and say that you failed, just front up, be transparent. And I happened to watch this video of you and your wife at, I think it was Family First podcast, not a podcast, but you were speaking to a bunch of people. It might've been a conference. And the first thing you did there was apologize for something you were trying to get through, and it didn't go through. And it was back then when you had the Moses beard going on. But when you said that, you nearly teared up. You can't fake this stuff. So can you touch on that a little bit? Because I guess here's what I'm trying to say. People think, okay, you're a politician, you must be perfect, you must get it all right. And it's not going to happen, because we're all just people. But the ability to just come and say, hey, look, man, we tried. It didn't work. I'm sorry. I'm ready to go again. And I think people really value and respect that, you know?
Yeah, that was at the Family First Forum. And so Bob McCroskey had asked us to share a few things. And it was a time in which the abortion law reforms had been passed, and I argued against them. And I got up and I just said, look, I'm really sorry. Because after that, when that passed, I went into my office and I just cried. I thought about, the 13,500 children, that we lose every year through abortion. I thought about the mothers, who've had the abortion and who've been traumatized. I thought about, the families and the couples and who are wanting to have children yet can't, and they're trying to adopt. And I just thought about, the loss that means to us, and how that we have shifted a social value inside of our country. And so I got up and, I shared that I felt that I'd failed. We hadn't, in one sense, because I'd tried to fight against it.
Sure.
But it was just the pain of it. And you're right about, because when people were down there, I started sensing people were losing, when I say people, the MPs were losing touch. I really did. I felt that they really didn't understand the impact of the decisions that they were making on people's lives. And it was just like, oh, no, we're just going to do it. And, and you get caught in what they call a bubble of populist politics, of people saying you have to do this. And even though you may not believe it, you just do it anyway. And that's what was happening. And so people were compromising. People were trading off their own values and their own beliefs, all for the sake of politics. And that's their political spirit. That's their part of it that becomes really ugly, that I saw down there. And was really, really difficult. It was one of the reasons I didn't want to go back, because it's just so hard to sit in that environment.
Yeah.
And it was a tough time.
I think this really highlights the difference between where, for some people, this is a profession. For some people, it's a calling. And when it's a calling, you carry it. When it's a profession, you perform.
Yeah.
And your heart doesn't have to be involved,
That's right.
So I really honor you for carrying this thing.
Yeah.
But this leads me now to go a bit deeper into this conversation of religion and politics, faith and politics. People are like, keep that separate. It should not merge. And it made me think, like, how can you separate a man from his values, a man from his faith, wherever he goes? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's like, when I was raised in, my grandmother, and I mean, the very first things that we learned was about how to do, to pray.
Mm.
It's way raised in Polynesian homes, there are three things in particular that you start off with. It's your faith, it's your family, and it's your future.
Mm.
And so faith is not something you can just throw away. It's not like a pair of shoes you take off, when you come into the door, right? It sits inside of you.
Mm.
It's what we get taught when we stop and we reflect on that. The prayers that we pray, the words that we read from the Bible are things that help guide you, and they have to sit inside of you. And you don't leave them behind, you take them with you. It should remind you about how you treat people, how you, when you're faced with a dilemma or a problem, how do you find a solution?
Mm.
You'll stop and you have to pray. Pray helps you to reflect, helps you pause for a moment and take stock of everything that's around you. And so therefore, it's not about, whether there's a separation between, faith and politics. I believe that people say that is because it's something they're trying to divert people in their values.
Mm.
I mean, I've heard that all the time when people say, no, religion and politics don't mix and your values don't matter. Of course they matter. It doesn't matter what you do. And I remember that in international politics, they talk about this. And I remember there was, at that time when Bill Clinton and the US president, and there was a big ethical debate.
Mm.
And there was this issue that happened with him and Monica Lewinsky, right?
Sure.
And this is all public, right?
Yep.
And so everyone said, it doesn't matter what he does behind the scenes is okay. It's what he does in front. And I said, well, hang on, no, that's not true. Who you are behind should be the same as who you're in front. Why? Because you've just said this, right? We want people who are authentic. We want leaders who are genuine.
Mm.
And yet when they're not genuine, we say, it doesn't matter as long as you do it behind the scenes, not in front. No, you have to be the same in both incidents.
Yeah.
And so for me, that's where the faith factor is real. And it doesn't matter whether I was an electrician, whether I was pastoring, whether I was doing community development, or when I'm in politics. It's all one and the same.
Yeah. Well, I would go so far to say you are the same person. You might just be doing a real good job of hiding it, but there's only so long you can hide that for, right? And truth comes out.
Yeah.
But what about when people say, oh, New Zealand, Alfred Ngaro started New Zealand, it's a Christian party, It's always funny for me when I hear that, because people don't say it's an atheist party, or, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on labeling and boxing what you were doing?
It's what I learned when I was young. And I remember that we grew up in Ponsonby, and my dad came home, once on a Saturday afternoon and said, yeah, we're going to go to the pools. And all the kids said, yeah, we're getting our towels and our togs. And my grandmother said, no, I'm not going to go to the pools. Dad said, no, you have to go to the pools, because, it's got a pool for the kids, pool for the adults, cafeteria, it's got a fence around it. It's a good place. And my grandmother said what only a Polynesian grandmother can say: if God wanted us to go to the pools, he would have born us in the pools. He born us in the ocean. Anyway, we went to the beach.
Yeah.
But it's not until you grow up, you realize that what my grandmother was saying, we were made to explore in the ocean, and the unseen and the unheard, the unknown at times. And yet it's a place of adventure. It's a place to explore.
Wow.
Where sometimes boxes are what we get in cities and in communities and even in government, right? You'll say, oh no, Joseph, you're Indian, so you should be in the ethnic, here's your ethnic box. And Alfred, you're Pacific, here's your ethnic box. Or were you in a city when you're in a town? Are you Polynesian? Are you West Auckland, South Auckland, East Auckland? And all of a sudden society is very quick to put us into boxes. And the same thing too, as soon as they say, oh, you're a Christian, all of a sudden people have got a predetermined mind about who you are, how you think, and what you should do.
Yeah.
And it's not until you engage face to face and they hear you, then they say, oh, that's not quite the same thing. So for me, people have, tried to say, oh, Alfred, this is a Christian party. And I said, no, it's a political party. And just like when I was with National, just because I was a Christian and a number of them were in there, didn't make National, right?
That's right.
A Christian party. It just made it a political party.
Yep.
And that's no different to what we are with New Zealand.
Man, so good. So we're going to go a little deeper here, and I'm loving the conversation. I hope you are too.
Yeah.
And I hope you guys are too up there. Let us know in the comments. Is this going well for you? Time is passing fast. But there are so many things that I'd like to go into, because you are a vast man, a deep man. But I want to go into this subject of what we are facing right now. And I think the living costs and the condition in the nation right now, I had the privilege to travel overseas this year 4 times. And I come back and I see the difference, even just from some places in Australia like Perth, and the cost just to live in Auckland. You know, I got friends that are like, what are you doing there? When are you going to move out of there? You know, and I'm like, man, if the Lord would let me, I'm out. But what are your thoughts on that? And can we actually do something about this?
Yeah, look, I mean, the number one issue for people is actually living costs, you know, and the 2 areas in particular is the cost of fuel, right, and also the cost of food. At the moment, the cost of food is just crazy, you know, and we call it food inflation. Now, when you look at what are the contributions to that, one part of it is the compliance that the government has actually put onto our farming sector. And so we're starting to see that. I mean, you and I know, you know, when a tray of eggs, right, all of a sudden we went up to the supermarket, there's no eggs, right?
Yeah.
Of course there's no eggs. Where's the eggs, right? They changed the rules. So once they changed the rules from moving from battery chickens into caged, into what they call colony caging, that meant there was a lot of outlay around that to try and shift and change, you know, around the farming. But what compounded that was actually also the supermarkets who took advantage of that situation, who tried to then say, or who did actually say that from a certain date, we want to only have free range. So now you had a lot of farmers that all of a sudden who lost out both the finance that they had commissioned to be able to get that farming, you know, up to compliance, but also to now you then had less farming that was out there. So people basically stopped. So what happens? Food started to increase. And so one of the things that I believe that we need to do, first of all, is to remove any unnecessary compliance on our farming sector. So it's not just the eggs. It's around fruit and veggies. It's our orchardists. It's also to our beef and lamb as well, and our pork. And at the moment, our farmers are made to feel like the villains rather than the heroes, because it's all about a culture of blame. So these are things that are compressing down on the cost of food and the living costs. And at the same time, too, you know, it's the cost of fuel. And so what we need to do is to relieve that pressure. We need to make sure we can provide, you know, ways for our families to be able to afford that. You know, the health stats are already showing that we are eating 50% less fruit and veggies at the moment. So therefore, we're not even doing all the nutritional things that are really important. So really, that's what the role of New Zealand, we believe the factors is that let's remove some of the compliance, unnecessary compliance on our farming. Let's look at the way that the pressures that the supermarkets are actually putting on our food producers, who, by the way, are some of the most they are the most emission efficient food producers in the world.
Yes.
And then let's allow that to thrive and to support our communities as well. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I did hear that New Zealand had really good farmers in terms of efficiency and emissions. Yeah. And obviously you've walked around and talked to a lot of them. So it's interesting that this problem can be solved. And I think one of the things that's standing out for me when you talk about hope and this conversation doesn't happen enough is that there are solutions. There are ways we can get out. Because I think a lot of what people are feeling is that, well, this has gone past a point where we can't come out, you know, when you think about the WHO, WEF, and there's so much, not even misinformation or disinformation, but no information. The only information is you're stuffed, you're done, you know. Can you touch on that a little bit? Like, how do we disentangle ourselves from this? And is it truly possible?
Yeah, so one of the economists that I follow is Cameron Baggery, and he often talks about if we keep saying the word recession, 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 all we keep feeling is depression, 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 right?
Yeah.
And so we just need to stop because words matter. And we know at the moment when we technically it's a recession, right? When we think about inflation at the moment, where things are, you know, for the cost of living, it's just becoming too hard for us as a nation. You know, we're looking at the interest rates. So one of the things we have to do in order to make a way forward is called innovation, finding more opportunities to innovate. And I believe that that's one of the things that we see is definitely area we want to progress. And for New Zealand, we want to be able to operate as well. You know, I was in Wairoa, and one of the things they said to me there, Joseph, was that, you know, there's a bus service that's about to stop. That means we're not going to get access to go up to Gisborne so that we can go to tertiary studies. Alfred, what do you have to say about that? And I said, go and buy your own bus. They turned around and said, what? Anyway, they all started cracking up. I said, what's so funny? They said, right next door is where the old Wairoa bus company used to be.
Wow.
And there are 8 buses sitting in a yard not doing anything.
Wow.
And one of the guys turned around and said, when they heard what was about to happen, they said, do you think we should go and buy our own bus? And they all laughed and said, yeah, but who are we? So what am I saying in that? One of the solutions I believe it's really important is actually to allow people to innovate and find their own solutions locally. You know, when we're stuck and we're thinking like it can't get any better and we're dependent on government to provide all the answers and all the solutions, I'm all about community solutions.
Yeah.
I'm all about enabling and helping communities find ideas that can work. And, you know, I said to them, can you imagine that actually if a community came together, they bought 2 buses, they trained, say, 4 or 6 drivers, got compliant, and here's what they would do. Now go back to the government and say, we've bought the bus, so we own it. We've got the drivers, so we can make sure it works. Okay, all we need for you to do is put the petrol in the tank. Now that's a better solution. Then I said to them, can you imagine that you're in Wairoa, right? Rather than going all the way up to Gisborne, why not bring innovation to you? And they said, well, what do you mean? And I talk about the fact is that I'm a big believer. I've seen countries like Singapore, small countries that are like ours.
That's right. Yeah.
And also countries like Israel. And, you know, one of their key things is that we call R&D, research and development. They invest in innovation, research and development. And out of that, small nations like ours can not only innovate ideas, but you generate revenue. And it's in us.
Yep.
And so for me, rather than sitting back thinking, hey, recession, everything's bad, it's all dark, let's say opportunity, let's say innovation, let's try and turn things around. And the last thing I want to say is this. You know, one of that's the things that's in my heart when I was actually doing a whole lot of community-led development is that we'd always start off by looking at a community from a strength-based sort of perspective. Because a lot of times governments and government departments often look at our communities from a deficit model. In other words, okay, well, look, what's happening in Southside? What's happening in Glen Innes? What's happening in Flaxmere? They often say they look at all the things that could go wrong. They have a thing called the deprivation index, which is a tool to be able to look at all the indicators, but then often it gets painted and stigmatized, again, put in a box as a community with all of these problems. And then our job is to go and fix the problems rather than turning around and saying, and here's our point of difference at New Zealand. And for me and my leadership, let's look at all the great things. The first question you ask is this: what do you love about your community? What do you love about this place here, you know, where you come from? And let that be your starting point. Always start from your strengths, right? And use the strengths. Doesn't matter how big or small they are, but whatever they are, use that as a catalyst to then address all the challenges that you face in your community.
That's so good. I think the comments are reflecting that people are really loving this empowerment, building the people. You know, I think this is a good conversation. Maybe we can touch on this, that yes, the people have the power, even though there are leaders. It's a smaller number compared to the people of the nation. I have been feeling like pioneers, innovators, and entrepreneurs in this next decade are going to be so important for nations like ours. What is New Zealand, or what can New Zealand do for these type of people, the pioneers, the innovators, and the entrepreneurs, or the small to medium businesses?
So to just finish off the last part of the question that you asked from your last question, and it connects with this. The first thing is that, you know, we've already got links and ties to the WHO, WF, and also to the UN. And I believe that we need to uncouple ourselves, and we still need to have diplomatic relationships, but we don't need to sell our soul. We need to have some independence. We need to retain the sovereignty of who we are. And the way we do that is by making sure we innovate, coming up with some new ideas. So when you're talking about businesses, the backbone of our economy is our SMEs, small to medium enterprises. There's over 550,000 of them. So an SME is 24 employees or less. But they're the butcher, the baker, the builder, they're the florist, the food markets and so forth. This is our SMEs. And so we need to allow them to flourish. So what we want to do is that we know in the first 5 years is the fallout rate. So for New Zealand, we want to back them. We want to reduce the provisional tax, because there's 3 things in particular that you're dealing with when you're running a small business, and then you feel the burn. It's your GST, it's a PAYE, right? And then it's your provisional tax. So in order for them to thrive in the first 5 years, let's make sure we look after the back of office support around finance, legal, and also to your HR. Let's make sure that we can address some of the issues around your provisional tax. But here's the part which I'm really excited about, Joseph. Let's then bring innovation into that space, Because the truth is if you're just maintaining, you're actually going backwards. If you're just going to say, and people saying, we're just going to survive, we're just going to get through, well, just surviving is actually going backwards. The way to go forward, you have to innovate a new idea, a new product, a new service. Because when you're doing that, then you're getting ahead of the game. And then what we need to do is, as a government, we need to provide different avenues to different markets. We're a small trading nation. We need a wider portfolio of different nations in which we can trade in. We've got a great opportunity in the Pacific. And so let's export these ideas while importing the things that we need. And, that's the key to our success. Innovate ideas, small trading nation. Let's be niche, but let's actually develop some things that are, world-class.
And this can be done, Alfred.
Yep, and it is being done.
Come on. I was going to go into some policies, and obviously people can go and check out your website and get all your policies on there. There's a lot of information already online. I do want to talk about the vax mandates because I feel like a lot of people were thinking about this.
Yeah.
And many, I guess, politicians know how to skirt questions.
Yeah.
I would just like to know your thoughts and any ideas, suggestions you have, because there are talks of another pandemic that's coming or another issue that's going to show up suddenly because everyone's a prophet these days. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So I've never agreed with the mandates. I never believed in them because the fact is that we've always lived in a country where people had the freedom to choose. Interesting. So when I was flying out today from down in Southland, inside the airport, I caught up with a friend of mine. He was a journalist, right? And he was the journalist that asked Jacinda Ardern the question, so Prime Minister, are you saying there's going to be two different classes of citizens? You remember when it was asked? And she said, yep, that's right.
Yeah.
As casual as that. And I was talking to him today, and that sort of leadership is the beginning of what was dividing us as a nation. And I believe the nation will be united. We've got leadership, number one, that gives people the freedom to choose, but also provides them with good information. With the mandates, we knew that the Pfizer vaccine already had a provisional license. In other words, there wasn't a full accountability of testing. They gave a threshold, and it's around about 70 to 80% of confidence, safety around this Pfizer vaccination. We knew that wasn't the case. And so therefore, when you do that, you just build a whole lot of a lack of trust in not only the system, but also in the people. And what I get concerned about is, people will say, oh, you're just one of these conspiracy theorists. Well, no, there's a lot of truth in this. And that is the fact is that, Jacinda Ardern had commissioned Helen Clark to chair and to lead, this global pandemic strategy.
Wow.
Why would we allow unelected officials in another place to dictate our sovereignty as a nation?
Yeah.
We don't have to do that. And I believe this is where things have just gone so far wrong. And people are not only angry, confused, and really annoyed, but they're turning around and saying, no, give us back our freedom, give us back our opportunity to be able to trust our own instincts. And I believe that's really important. So that's for me. That's what I believe. Yeah.
Yeah. And going forward, people are talking about how there will be a pandemic again. What are your thoughts on that, and what might be different about the approach?
Well, it's really interesting because I think the science now is that people are starting to see that a lot of the pandemic and where it came from, and was it necessary? Was it truly a global pandemic? Right? I mean, people knew that actually there were far more deaths from the common flu than there was from the COVID-19. Now we're starting to see that from the vaccinations themselves, there are COVID, injuries. And so, this is becoming a real thing. I mean, I had a friend who had COVID, long COVID, and it was one of the very few who were being injured and also had long-term conditions because of the vaccinations, not because of COVID, it was because of the vaccinations. So there's what they call the vaccine injuries. Those concerns, I believe, are very real for us, in New Zealand. And I just believe that we need to, number one, have good information. Make sure the information is available to us as a country and as a people. And then we have the right people around the table, not just, a room that's full of epidemiologists, right?
Yeah.
You need people who actually understand what's important for us as a nation and as a people as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So good. We talk about morals, talk about values, we talk about ethics, and maybe morals are the why you do something, ethics are the how you do something. And I think both are so important. And it's just been interesting watching how things have been done, not just here, but in many nations over the last 3 to 4 years, and just exposing maybe a disconnect between so-called leaders and the actual people. So if I asked you this question, do the people have the power, Alfred? What would you say to me?
The people have always had the power. I'll give you a good example. I remember talking to a friend of mine, and he's actually from India, and he was telling me he was working for a government department. And he said that, what's really strange is at a time when, India had a population of over 1 billion people, and yet the ruling class, the colonial class, right, the British that were there, were only made up of 8,000 officers.
Wow.
8,000. And I said, what happened? He said, somehow the way that things were constructed, that it disempowered the confidence in the people, right, to be able to have its own voice. That's why people like Gandhi, right, became revolutionary, right?
Yeah.
Because he started basically challenging the system and encouraging people to have confidence in their voice and then with their values. So the people always, have the power. And I think that people are now asking for their rights. But I would always say, always remember, with rights come responsibilities.
Yeah.
And you have to make sure every choice has a consequence. Every right has a responsibility. So you can't just say, I want the right for this and right for that, without also to making sure that you're responsible with the gift, with the opportunity to be able to use that freedom, in an appropriate way.
So good, man. I saw a comment that said Alfred Ngaro for Prime Minister. Got my vote. Mahatma Gandhi is really interesting and very close to my heart, purely because of how he turned a nation with no fighting, no violence. He chose ahimsa, which means non-violence, and just an older man in a loincloth, just shaking a nation because he had this influence. And I'd love to go into that subject, because a lot of times we think political leaders, because of a title, and this is seen in, churches, at education sector, all that kind of stuff, where a title gives you an assumed influence. But in reality, history has shown us that these leaders rise up that have the real influence, with or without a title. And Mahatma Gandhi was one of those, and all these politicians came and sat at his feet to try and get some kind of sway there. What are your thoughts on that, on influence? And I feel like you are a man of influence. And as you go up and down the country, people who maybe came to your meeting and were not going to vote for you, suddenly turning because they're sensing something, they're feeling something. Can you touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, look, I mean, when you think about Mahatma Gandhi, and, people often associate him and also Martin Luther King Jr., right, with passive resistance as a powerful social construct, right, to be able to shift the nation, and who would withstand against, violent protest. And so there's a power of a deep abiding love. It's not a weak love. It's actually a very powerful, strong love that they would presence themselves as well. But if I relate that to, we've got a New Zealand story. It's called Parihaka. In fact, Mahatma Gandhi and others actually referred to it.
Wow.
Because in 1881, what had happened is that you had two Maori prophets, Tohu and Te Whitimai, who basically said to the people, there were soldiers that were about to basically confiscate the land, and it was unjust. It wasn't appropriate. It wasn't right. But instead, in my understanding is that, like in Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6, for unto us a child is born, a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulders. Now, governance means to take charge of, dominion, rule, and reign. That means take charge of your affairs, take charge of your heart and your home, and then your community. And so what they said was that, and he shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Almighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. So they took the element of peace and welcomed in the Prince of Peace. And so they went out and they actually they didn't fight. They basically surrendered at that point in time. Now, the history actually is not a good one because of the consequences of what happened to that. But it was still recorded a moment of passive resistance, one of the first recorded moments of passive resistance, in the world. So what am I saying in all of this? I think in all these stories, we try to look for the principle. What's the teaching that comes out of it? Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., Parihaka. And what I see is that in actual fact, it's not the politics of the day that actually can rule the social movement of a heart of a people. Actually, it's the people that can shift the politics of the day. And I believe this is where we are now. And so if there's a movement where people turn around and say, and remind them of this, there was only 8,000 officers, right, that ruled a nation of 1 billion. There's only 120 MPs, right,
Man.
that are making decisions for 5 million people. Now, let's now start to do the numbers. What does that say? That means that we can create a movement for change.
Come
It
on.
doesn't take much. And we need to be careful not to allow the voice of the small, right, the tyranny of the minority to rule the majority. We can shift this. And I suppose that's what I say when I'm talking to people. 5% is, 150,000 votes.
Mm.
And everyone say, it's colossal, it's too hard. No, it's not. Why? Because a social movement of change, right, within the hearts of a nation and a people can shift the politics of the day.
Yeah.
That's the power that it has. And I believe that once we align ourselves and understand that, then we'll become. It was just a powerful thing when this Indian, friend of mine said there was only 8,000 officers, right?
Man.
8,000 in charge of 1 billion people.
It's crazy.
It's crazy,
Yeah.
right? And I believe that's what these incredible people. I mean, it's like Sister Rosa Parks, right? Here she was just a cleaner. All she wanted to do is to get home on the bus.
Mm.
And then when she was told, no, you got to get off the seat and go out to the back, and here's what she said, right? Not today. That's all she said. Not today. And of course, we got the Martin Luther King Jr., who become famous for it. But that Sister Rosa Parks, she was just an ordinary woman. And then out of that one movement, right, actually that's where the whole sort of aspect of the segregation and the movement that happened right throughout happened because of one woman making change.
So good.
And a social change that actually moved the heart of a nation. Yeah.
So good. In India, they had this guy start a groundswell movement. He called his party Aam Aadmi Party, which means just the ordinary man's party.
Yeah.
And it picked up so much momentum because finally people found a man who were like, man, he's going to represent me, not try and sell me, bait me, use me, but he's going to represent me. Yeah. And so totally what you're saying is so powerful. And I hope we're taking note that there are 120 MPs trying to make decisions for 5 million. So we know where this can go, right? I just want to touch on the Maori people because I've heard you talk about this before, even with your intercessors movement. And I think you talked about the 65 illiterates and 7, I think it was. Yeah. And you talked about how you lead. That was your heart that, hey, Maori people, you lead. You are the kaitiaki, the caretakers of this nation. And you have this authority in a way. Can you touch on that a little bit and the importance of Maori people stepping into that in this time?
Yeah, I mean, look, when I was born, one of the things that my parents told me is that when they brought me back from the hospital, is that they took my afterbirth, my pito, right, and they dug a hole and they put it in the ground and they planted a tree on top, and then they said a prayer. And I asked them what was the importance of that, what was the significance, and it was a symbolic way, and there are different sort of cultural nuances in it, but basically it was saying that you are now one with the people and one with the land. And so you just feel this thing like you're actually in the ground. And I suppose I've always had this sense and belief that, our Maori people, our tangata whenua, our mana whenua, are the indigenous people of this land. Despite at the moment, there's a whole lot of political footballing that's going on.
Yes.
Which is really unfortunate now because race has become a dividing issue in our nation.
Mm-hmm.
But, Māori are a gift that I believe are significant and important. And I believe is that when they arise in the true gifting that they have, when you see them arise in what they have to offer and to be able to lead and guide us, my goodness, what a difference it makes. Look, it's no different. If you went to, say if you went to Fiji, right, you'd talk about those who are indigenous. And yes, the population has become multicultural, but you talk with them. Why? Because they've understood, they've been long in the land. They've understood the roles of responsibility. It's like if you go to Israel, right, you talk to the Israelis, even though they are Palestinians and Arabs that live there, but because they've got their DNA, they've got history and heritage. And so I believe it's really important that we honor, our Māori people. And kaitiaki comes with both rights and responsibilities, right? It's the right to be able to look over the land and to nurture the land, but there's a responsibility too to be able to open the land and actually allow it to flourish for all people, in this country. And when we get that right, my goodness, it's amazing. And so there are some pretty amazing stories that can be told, like, when when Maori, and especially the combination of the gospel of coming together,
Mm.
whether it's in Samuel Marsden coming with Ruatara, and of all the places in 1814 and all the bays in the Bay of Islands for him to come to was a place called Ohi, which means shout to the risen one.
Wow.
Where over 400 years, the local iwi there, Ngati Hine, which had already had a visitation. And so they call it the Bay Ohi, shout to the risen one. The valley that goes up is called Rangihaua, gateway to heaven.
So good.
The mountain is called Mataka, one with fiery eyes, because they'd had this visitation of a God who had the eyes of compassion, the fire eyes of compassion.
Wow.
So of all the places for Marsden to come, it was there. And so you can see these elements of actually bringing people together, that becomes significant. And then also to Henry Williams and what he had to share in 1840 around the Treaty of Waitangi and the Treaty of Waitangi, 2 windows to look in, English and Maori, Maori and English. And the word kawanata, which means covenant, and this covenant relationship of binding and uniting people together. And out of that, what we were able to see is that the greatest movement, both, spiritually and socially, happened, with Māori in our nation. You've got the names like Tahupōtiki Wiremu Rātana from the Rātana. You've got Wiremu Tamihana from down in the Waikato, and the Kingi Tanga movement that happened out of there all came because of them. Kawati up in the far north, even Te Raupraha, after his warring escapades, and then he gave his life, it was his son who went down into Te Waipounamu in the South Island. So all of these are names of men and women of faith who dug wells of faith, right? And that's why I believe these footprints of faith are significant. And that's why my heart is that, when Māori open this door and allow it to come in, my goodness, we're going to see just the open heart of this nation just begin to really thrive. Yeah.
It is so refreshing to hear what you're saying. I know you were maybe the only or one of the few that stood up for some of the things that were going down post-COVID and some of the bills or laws that were passed to allow police, I think, into maraes and stuff. Can you touch on that story a little bit?
Yeah, so it was the COVID-19 Public Health Response Bill in 2020. And I remember that the government, the Labour Green government, were about to pass a bill that would allow for unwarranted access into maraes, but not only onto maraes, into all homes. And at that time, I had some Māori leaders contact me and said to me, "Can you speak on our behalf?" I said, "Well, hang on, what about the Māori bros on the other side?" No, they don't want to talk. So basically, these leaders had been given an opportunity, what they call an exposure draft of this bill, and they talked about, one thing in particular was just about this unwarranted access, even during tangihana, which is a funeral on a marae. And they said, do not do this. Well, of course, they didn't listen. So I just got up and I just said, well, load me up. I'll be your shotgun. I'm just going to fire away these bullets and start, really challenging them. Well, sure enough, it was the worst day for the Māori caucus from what I was told, because all the Māori leaders started saying, what the heck are you guys doing? Joseph, this is what happens is that, this political spirit, power is seductive and it can become insatiable. And all of a sudden you lose the sense of who you are. And in that moment, I just felt, I felt privileged that some of the leaders, Māori leaders, felt that they could trust me, with, their comments and their thoughts and their concerns about this. And so I just spoke out. I spoke out against this. I told them how wrong I was. What I didn't like is the next day, the response that came, and in particular from Kelvin Davis, is that there was a real touch of arrogance, because he got up and said, well, you're Māori, you're going to have your way, but be careful what you ask for. And I just thought, wow, you can lose the element of the factors is that, you're there in the House of Representatives, you are elected to represent your people. And when you lose that, then, it's time for change. It's time to say that actually we need to have people that are elected to represent our communities. This is, as I said to you, the problem. And what I started to hear in Parliament is that when you have an overwhelming number of people speaking out against, then they flip the coin and now they call it the tyranny of the majority. So, I often said to them, well, how'd you get here in the first place? You got into Parliament because you got the majority, so you're there. So you can't have it both ways.
Wow.
So for me, the privilege to be able to speak out their concerns, and also too for the funeral directors, I did the same thing too. I spoke out on their behalf. But yeah, and I just felt, and I felt this is the time when people started losing confidence
Yes.
in Parliament again
Yes.
and in people. And when you hear the numbers that don't vote, it's because they don't trust the system and they don't trust the people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that disconnect is so
Yeah.
wide. I just want to say I honor your courage. I
Yeah.
applaud your courage to be one of the few that's willing to stand up for what you believe in.
Yeah.
And we can talk about this wasted vote propaganda that's been going all over the place. I feel that's what it is, right? But I just want to say I love that you honor the Maori people, that you stand up for Maori people in their original intent and their true expression.
Yeah.
I've heard you talk about being a peacekeeper or a peacemaker and how there is a difference. I think a lot of people think being a peacemaker is just being a peacekeeper, but there is actually a difference, and there is a standing up for something.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so for me, when you're peacekeeping, it's like just wanting to keep people happy, right? Yeah, I mean, at the moment, there's a lot of political rhetoric and people saying words. It's just trying to make people happy, and so they just say them. They say, "Oh, we're going to stop co-governors." Everyone goes, "Yeah, we're going to take out Māori," and they say, "Yeah, we're going to stop doing this, stop doing that." And but that's just you're just appeasing people, right? You're not actually having the courage of your conversation to be able to say, "Let's do the right thing here." And so peacemaking, and the difference is you're not afraid to go into place of contention. You're not afraid to open up the space and say, this is a really tough space. But let's now ensure the fact is that we enter into this. Let's make it safe enough so people can say that, number one, I don't know, and maybe number two, I don't agree, but I'm willing to be here. And, I remember in my maiden speech, Joseph, I said a quote from Dame Whina Cooper. And here's what she said. She said, you Māori, you get all hoha, you get all angry, when the Pākehā is talking about this and talking, you don't like it, and you basically stamp your fist on the table and you walk out. And she said, but when you walk out and when you're out of the room, they make decisions for you. So she said, stay in the room.
Wow.
Stay in the room. And I believe that's really important. We need to create a space where we all stay in the room. We stay in the space. You see, if we want a better New Zealand for our children, if we want a New Zealand that's rich in both its bicultural foundation, so it's thriving in its multicultural, context of what we live in today, then we need to stay in the room. We need to stay in the room when we don't understand. We need to stay in the room when it's really hard. We need to stay in the room even when we don't agree. We need to stay in the room, because by staying in the room, you actually eventually work out to a better place. And then people begin to say, I didn't understand before, I didn't agree, but what I come to realize, this is the best thing for us. This is the best thing for us as a country. Now I can understand that, the brokenness of Māori in regards to, the breaches and the promises, and the covenant that was broken. It's a real thing. And you can't just get over it by saying, let's just get a treaty settlement done and tick a box and pay some money out and get some redress and it'll all be okay. That's important. But you know what's more important? Is an emotional, spiritual element of redress. And that's what we're not doing.
Yeah.
We're not redressing the emotional, spiritual element of what happened. And so what we do, we fast track by thinking like, let's just do the, what you call subjective thing on our head. Let's just do this and it'll be better. And here's what happens. People still sit in the bitterness that they are still in at the moment. It doesn't make them better. And if our courage is to make us a better nation, then let's have the courage to have the emotional and the spiritual redress, as well as the other redress, right, around a treaty settlement. When we do that, my goodness, we're going to see what our country, we've been praying for, what our national anthem has been singing for since 1875, and 1878, because it was translated 3 years later into Māori.
Yeah.
This is what those foundations were actually all about. Now we're going to be able to see the very thing that makes us who we are as a nation, and then we'll be able to exploit, to express that gift to the nations.
Man, it becomes very clear to see who is just about the problem and not about the people.
Yeah.
And I think your heart for the people and the problem is really, it shines through when people hear you speak. And I think that's a big deal, you know?
Yeah.
All around the world, we're seeing the Black Lives Matter, like a black-white segregation issue. South Africa's got that going. India, there's a lot of religious stuff going on just within the Sikhs and the Hindus. And, you know, it's just like almost like there's something trying to divide every nation. And so I love when you keep saying that you want to bring the nation together, you want to unite the nation. Is that truly possible, Alfred?
Oh, of course it is. You know, the thing is that unity is not a destination, it's a journey. You know, it starts off when you and I, right, as brothers can be together, where we can eat at the same table, right, where our families can play together, where we can enjoy time. And then it grows from the different friends that we have. You know, unity is a destination. And unity is a journey, not a destination, right?
Yeah.
And we need to keep journeying together. And the more that we journey together, you know, I believe the fact is that then that's where we begin to grow. And then we can stop the other bits that try and continue to divide us. You know, one of the things I remember, one of the proud moments I had was, you know, in our Anzac celebrations, services, that is, and even meeting some of the old war veterans. And I remember, you know, meeting some time ago one of the last remaining Maori battalion war veterans out of service. And one of the things they talked about with his Pākehā, you know, friend, was they said, we wish we could we could have brought back what we learned in the time of war.
Wow.
And that was the ability to unite together to fight a common enemy. You know, and there's so many things that I believe that's so important. It's been in our history. You know, it's been in our emotional DNA where it is possible. And I believe there are many good people in this nation that's what we want. Yeah. And we just need to shift the culture at the moment where we've sort of got into two things, what I believe, you know, which is some of the challenge. We've got a consumer culture, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we think that we can buy things to fix things rather than the old school way, which we had to sit down and it's like fixing a car, right? You had to actually, that's that, you know, number 8 wire stuff where we had to fix stuff. We couldn't get any parts, but we could stop. We could find a way to actually make it better. You know, that's one of the things. The other thing is that we live in what I believe is now a culture of voyeurism. So we've got a lot of reality TV, and you know, it's happening, right? So we like to look. We have an emotion because, oh my gosh, you know, Treasure Island, and come on, Tamaiti, you're gonna get there, and we've got all of these things playing, you know. But here's the thing, right? We can look, we can see, we can watch, we can even get emotional, but we never get our hands dirty, right? We never get our feet wet, and so therefore we don't engage. So we're all living in this virtual reality, but we don't know how to actually, in one sense, engage in the reality of life and of community. And so what happens is that we become softer, we become less resilient. And that's one of the things I think, you know, when you look at our emotional state, is that we're losing the ability to have resilience. And resilience comes from pressure. Yeah. Pressure comes from tough times. You know, when you're having to, you know, to really work hard and slog it out, and instead consumerism tell us, no, let's make it easier. You know, virtual reality has said you don't have to get dirty, you don't have to get hurt. When the reality is, you're going to have to get dirty, you're going to have to get hurt, right? Because pain teaches you something, right? It tells you don't make the same mistake again. Yep. You know, all these things. And now we're trying to remove that from our lives and from our children and our community. And say, no. This is the real thing. And that's why when we've been traveling the country, you know, we're going to towns where they say no one comes. No one sits in these small community halls or these churches or these pubs and these cafes, you know, listening and hearing. And then the thing is that the question is, are you going to come back? Are you still going to be here? And when I say to them, we're not just a one-hit wonder, right? This is not a how bizarre moment, right? Just, you know, this is a legacy for the future. Yeah. You know, this journey that we are on with New Zealand and what we are doing, you know, is something that we want to know. We want to build it for the future where generations can come. Our children could find a place where they can stand and they can make a declaration of truth, where they can exercise grace, you know, where they can propose ideas and innovate, you know, and be entrepreneurial, all of those things, where they can find when things go wrong or where things are really hard, where there's conflict, where there's tension, they will have the courage inside of them because they'll say, you know what, you know, my dad and his friend, They were on a platform. They were out there in the community, right? And they knew what it was, to endure through tough times.
Mm.
They were not afraid because they could sit in a room and not move, even though how tense and difficult and how hard it was, even though the emotions were dark, even though there was brokenness and bitterness in their room. And you know what? But they sat in the room and they stayed, because what came out of it was what was greater than all the darkness and the difficulty, was this power of love that was able to transform, was able to heal and to restore and to give hope. That's the stuff that I believe that you and I, we want to be a part of. And that's the legacy we pass on.
Man, so good. You talk about resilience, and having worked around youth and seeing what's happening with youth right now, I can definitely see that resilience is kind of a thing of the past at the moment. And obviously New Zealand's got this youth suicide rate. There's a male suicide issue. I'd love to know some of your thoughts on that. I heard you on the podcast talking about some vulnerable moments that you had considering your childhood, and you just being able to let out your trauma, that you wept, and you didn't just weep, you wailed, and you were able to let go of trauma. What are your thoughts around that, the suicide issue here, and what we could do and what you could do as New Zealand to start shifting some of that?
Yeah, one of the things I say to people that, we can create a social change without having government intervention, right? Because you can't legislate the condition of a heart. And all it takes is for one heart to be willing, for change. And so when I was doing a lot of work with fathering, and that came from a place where, I loved my dad, but I knew I had to learn to forgive my dad, because there were times where I didn't like my dad and I ended up hating my dad. But I realized that actually my dad couldn't give me what he didn't have, because he too had an upbringing where he lost his dad. And so therefore, how do you rewrite that? How do you actually change the course so you're not passing it from one generation to the next? And so I had to go through my own journey of change. But in order to do that, I had to face, my own challenges, inside of my own brokenness. Because you can't take people to a place you haven't been.
So good.
If you haven't worked through what it means to deal with your own brokenness, you can't take people and help people to guide them through so they can find healing and come to a better place. And so as I started to do that, what I started finding myself is actually running programs for dads, and being able to do that. And so how does that relate to suicide? Is that I believe the fact is there's a number of things that are really important. Children and young people and even adults are looking for belonging, and often that comes from the first place is from the family. And so if you're not getting that from your family, if you're not getting from your mother and from your father, that's your foundation. And I remember writing working with these dads in the warehouse, right? And there was all these guys and the people at the warehouse wanted me to do some fathering work with them. So I went in to smoke at time and I said, "Oh, g'day guys, g'day." And they're all there having a smoke and having a coffee. And they said, "Oh, what are you guys here for?" And he said, "Oh, hey, hang on. You're the guy that's meant to tell us how to be a better dads." And I said, "Mate, I got 4 kids, 2 grandchildren, and even I struggle on the best of days." And then they said, "Well, you're a useless expert, eh?" And then I said, well, maybe, but maybe the truth is there are no experts. Maybe there are just everyday dads trying to do the best they can.
So good.
Some days we win and some days we lose.
Yeah.
But, all we need is that we need to be encouraged and believe that we can get better. And they said, well, what are we going to do? And I said, well, why don't we write our own book on fathering? They looked at me and said, are you kidding? They said, dude, I just drive a truck. And I said, bro, I'm just a forklift driver. Another guy said, hey, I can beat all of them. I just get a pallet and I put a box on a box and I bubble wrap that thing. And I said, man, let's write a book on fathering for the truck driver, for the forklift driver, and the bubble wrap guy. So that's what we did. Got them in a room and I had 3 sides of the walls and I had paper. And on one side of the wall was good. The other way was bad. And the other way was ugly. And they said, oh, what's this? I said, you remember Clint Eastwood, best movie? The good, the bad, and the ugly. And you got to make it so it connects, right? Sure. And they just laughed and say, here's the good stuff. So on this wall, we're just going to put all the good stuff. On that wall, all the bad stuff. And that wall there is all the ugly stuff that we know we should never have gone there. But the truth is, some of us have lived in that space.
Mm-hmm.
And it was an amazing time, right? and we gave them cameras. They took photos with them with the kids. Some of them had never had photos with their kids before.
Wow.
So they were washing dishes with their kids. They were playing with their kids, reading with the kids, wrestling with their kids as
Yeah.
well. And all of these things. And we made this book. And it's a long story to say, but a very powerful element of it is that in order to address some of these issues, right, very powerful, guarantee that for those whether it's suicide ideation or whether those who have actually committed suicide and have died from suicide, you read the letters, you hear the stories, and they're all to do with a sense of belonging.
Wow.
And if we can't give them, our children who become adults or young people, that sense of belonging, when days get really tough for them and they wonder where can they go, they need to know that there's always a home in our heart for them. And need to know that it doesn't matter how dark, how difficult it is, that they are loved, that they belong. And that comes from us as parents. That's got to be the first place that's got to happen. And one of the things we do want to do is that we want to have a policy called Path to Parents as First Teachers.
Wow.
We want to support them. Support dads to be better dads, support mums in the work they're doing, support parents at home. Instead of, schools that are now trying to be the place of teaching intimacy around, gender, sexuality, actually that's the place of the home. Let the home do that and give them a set of tools to think about, well, what could you talk about? How could you emotionally encourage your kids as they're exploring and find their way at the other end? Not the way that's happening at the moment. You see, what we've got is that we've got this, and they call it a nanny state, but we've got a state now that's trying to control the way we raise our kids, and that's going to be the impact of that. And a lot of that comes from broken homes, right? Not as a way of judging, but as a way of saying, if that's some of our reality, what's the question? If there's brokenness in the home, what's the question to allowing that to be what it is, and what are we going to do to help support them?
Man. Speaking of some of the gender stuff that you're talking about, is there something that can be done to stop this from becoming normal and mainstream? And the second question, I remember reading a comment around homeschooling, and somebody was asking, what is New Zealand going to do for the homeschooling parents in the nation? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I'll start off with the last one. When it comes to homeschooling, a lot of the parents that we talk to is that they homeschool because they've lost faith in the public education system.
Correct.
And because they believe that they're teaching the values that the parents don't want them to learn. And then often the system doesn't treat their kids well. There's a lot of bullying. There's other things like that. So the first thing I believe that's important is that we need to bring faith back, in a sense of trust inside the public education sector. As I said before, the whole gender issue and sexuality is not the place for the school. That is not the place. And most teachers don't want to teach that, right? It's the place of the home. It's the place of the parents. So to me, that needs to stop. And then, at the moment, I know a lot of people who are homeschooling are asking for more support in what they are doing. But at the end of the day, they would rather them go, this is the feedback we get, to the public education system rather than being at home. So let's return some confidence back into that sector as well. Yeah. And the second thing is, around getting parents more active and more opportunities, not only in school governance, but I've seen great programs like Manaia Kalani, which is in Point England, where it's not just about an educational development program, it's a community-wide development program. In other words, how do you help parents to better themselves? We would often say, and I was on the board of trustees there, if you want the best for your kids, then be the best in who you are as well.
Come on.
And so therefore you've got a school that gets used, most of the times from 8 through to 5, and then you've got a school building there that's basically vacant in most cases. Why not use that as a learning hub for parents to get to upskill themselves in what they're doing? Had you do that, now you're growing a community and you're getting it to innovate and to begin to thrive. When we were in Point England in Glen Innes, we had the largest state housing area in New Zealand. So we worked with them and said, how about we get better connectivity even into a state house? So the kids got access and connectivity in school and out of school. There's so many great innovative ideas to me that are great around education, and that's part of New Zealand's policies.
So good, man. So good. All right. We're about 1 hour, 22 minutes into this conversation. I think it's going really well. And I think it's going well for Alfred too. And for you guys on here, we've had around 200, 215 people here sticking it out. So we've got about 35, 40 minutes. In a little bit, we're going to start taking some questions. But you might want to tag your friends. You might want to share this with people that need to hear this. We're at a critical time in our nation. And I love that as people, we have the power, you know. So I want to encourage you, tag people, share this around. And we're just going to go a little deeper here. So we're good?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay. So let me hit this quickly. Co-governance. Everyone's talking about this. And I think the thing I love about you is that you're not just a reactor, you know, like, well, this has happened, let's react to it, you know, instead of responding to it and thinking about the future implications. I think a lot of people like to hear that, okay, this happened, so we're going to react this way and that's going to solve the problem. But your approach seems to be very centered, very measured. And I'd love for you to just touch on that a little bit, co-governance and what's going on.
Yeah, so co-governance is nothing new. It's been around for a while. The context of co-governance originally was actually a conversation that was had between a portfolio of Crown and iwi relations and also the Waitangi Tribunal. And so this is where the context in which the idea and the thought around co-governance existed. What is new, though, is where you've got the current government who've taken that out and actually tried to apply it upon a whole variety of different contexts. Now, I have to say that at the moment, you know, under, I suppose, a socialist ideology, which is around power and control, and then the governmental mechanisms called centralisation. So you think about the district health boards at the moment, 20 DHBs now become one, it's called Te Whatu Ora. You think about all the tertiary providers, all of a sudden become one, it's called Te Pukenga. Three Waters was another example, right? They wanted to have overall governmental control around that. And then to me, that's that centralisation. Then they took out the whole definition of co-governance. Then they wrote a whole paper around it called He Puapua, built into it this whole thing around the Indigenous Coalition of Recognition of Indigenous Rights and around co-governance. And now you try to apply it on all sorts of different contexts, local government and health and different government departments. And what it was doing is trying to make a one-size-fits-all, which both confused and frustrated a whole lot of people. And now people said, we don't want to have things like elected and unelected, right? And people said, stop it. We don't want it anymore. But it's not just as simple as that. You can't stop it because there's a bigger conversation about how do we work with Maori in that context. So to us in New Zealand, we need to take that out, not make it a one-size-fits-all, but still retain the importance around this bicultural relationship between Maori and the Crown, between Maori and in regards to the needs that they have, right? Because it's really important. Because we have to always remember our country was founded on a bicultural relationship, which is very unique around the world. It's called, in one window, the Treaty of Waitangi. In the Maori window, it's called Te Treaty of Waitangi. Two different interpretations that look at the way in which we can unite together. And at the moment, co-governance is being weaponized and is being used as a way to divide us as a nation and as a people. So to me, we need to, first of all, put it back into its context. It's not a one-size-fits-all, but still retain the importance about this, what you call the important principle. Because when we look at health, it is Maori that has a predominance around issues around the lack of healthcare and support. When we think about law and order, it's the same thing too. So we need to then ask ourselves, how do we have, a courageous conversation about this to address these issues? But at the moment, co-governance has been weaponized to a point where, you've got people like the ACT Party turn around and their big slogan, stop co-governance. You've got Winston, and for instance, in New Zealand First, turning around and said, there's no Indigenous, there's no such thing. And we're just going to get rid of all of these things, get rid of the Maori names and so forth. That's not going to make us better as a nation. That's not going to make us better as a people. And everyone's trying to say, just answer the question. It's a black and white. You can't make it black and white, right? And I'm not saying what you call the 50 Shades of Grey. What I'm saying to you is that actually it's an important question that deserves time, consideration, good information, and then working through together. That's what I believe is really important for us in the co-governance, yeah.
Man, so good. And we are seeing, I guess, a lot of politicians to get in, just weaponizing this and using it. But I love what you're saying. I love your heart, and I think most people would agree. Talking about the Maori people and this nation, Maori and the crown, and talking about, say, patriotism. You know, I came here from India when I was 11 years old, and we have Independence Day in India, August 15th, you know, and wherever you are in your school, you will have a parade and you're reminded of the history and you salute and you hear the anthem and you tear up and you're proud to be an Indian. You know, there's movies on it, like Bollywood movies on it. I'm proud to be an Indian, you know. Having been to America in the last few years, you see, like, God bless America. You got American flags. You have flags on people's houses. You have rules around what you can and can't do with the flag. You have this patriotism. Now, obviously, some people would say they're OTT, like over the top and boxed into their own country. But that patriotism is something I'm not sure if I've seen much of in the nation. I'd love to know your thoughts on it. Now, obviously, when you're watching the All Blacks and it's like, yeah, All Blacks, like, you know, or the Warriors up the wires, we've seen that recently. But in terms of patriotism for this nation, what are your thoughts on that? To be proud to be a Kiwi?
Yeah, look, I mean, I felt that when we decided to consider changing the flag, it began to challenge some of their patriotism, because I know that I sat in those select committee meetings where people were turning around and making submissions, oral submissions, and they'd turn around and say, "Why would you do that?" I mean, there was one guy who turned around, took off his shirt, and on his back he had tattooed with the New Zealand flag, and he said, "By the way, I've served, my country, in the military, as did my father, as did my grandfather." So it just evokes such a powerful emotion that people have fought, for this country. And so I agree with you. And where their patriotism comes under threat is that when we have different values that become introduced and different ideologies that begin to challenge that. Even, for instance, I remember people were turning around and trying to challenge, the national anthem, and, even just as recently, I think Calvin Davis, I know Andrew Little was another one of those. And they're all turning around and trying to say, no, we shouldn't have it. And part of the reasons why we have those types of questions is because people, number one, don't know its history, don't know its heritage, and don't know the importance of what it is. If people actually sat down and actually listened and read and understood and sung all 6 verses of that, all of a sudden, wow, this is powerful. If people realize this was written in 1875 by Thomas Bracken down in Lawrence in the South Island, and then translated 3 years later into Maori, then you realize actually it was a declaration actually in English and in Maori. It's incredibly powerful. And that patriotism, it only comes when it's being threatened, to be honest, because you don't know, how good you've got it, or you take things for granted, right, when it's never challenged. But I believe now it has been challenged. Our freedoms have been challenged. And so now people are turning around and say, do we still love this country? I don't think I liked it when, do you remember that time when Taika Waititi turned around and said, "Oh, New Zealand's a racist country," and it just all of a sudden people said, "What are you talking about?" Now there was some truth in what he had to say, but we need to be careful when we start throwing things out, especially when you're in a influential position, because then it makes us doubt. And when I say that, if you're going to say it, then follow it up, back it up, then be prepared to have a proper conversation and say what we are proud of. And I think I've seen people who are celebrities in these positions, right, who can throw careless words out. If you're going to be a leader, right, then you have to have responsibilities, right? And I remember Mahatma Gandhi, the story where he was talked about, with the Bill of Rights, and he turned around and he said, I won't sign it because I'd rather sign the Bill of Responsibilities, right? So we need to be more responsible for who we are, for this nation and for its people. More proud of the fact of our jersey. I mean, I'm thinking about the All Blacks now, right? and when I was playing for the parliamentary rugby team, I remember that we went into the school of rugby, where rugby actually began in England.
Wow.
And it was amazing. And just to be able to stand there, we sung the national anthem, we did our own haka as well. You just realize how proud you are to represent your people and your community. And I just hope that we never lose that. And how can we ensure that? Well, I just believe that we need to go back to singing the national anthem in our schools again, right? We need to be able to reminding ourselves about that. We need to make sure that we teach the history and heritage of our nation. That's really important for who we are as a country. Those things I think are really important. And so, no, I'm a big believer that our patriotism is really important, even though we're becoming a multicultural nation.
Yes.
The stats are showing that actually we are now growing, and in a lot of our cities, up to 30% of our cities are made up of, our demographics are made up of people who were born overseas.
Wow.
You know, but that doesn't matter, because when most people come, they want to come to a country that they're proud of.
Yes.
I tell you one last story is that I remember when I used to go into the citizenship ceremonies,
Yep.
and my goodness, people had to learn about New Zealand, right?
Yep.
You have to learn about the country, its history and heritage. You then sang the national anthem, and there they were, as proud as anything, with their certificates, right? I've now become a New Zealander. And I just wondered whether, we've lost some of that,
Mm-hmm.
In our schools and so forth. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's true. You got the Pledge of Allegiance and things like that happen in America in the schools.
Yeah.
And obviously, like I said, in India, all through your schooling grades, you were reminded, you were told the stories. And so history was there in the back of people's hearts. And I think that would be big here. As an Indian coming to New Zealand when I was 11, like right now, if people say, are you Indian, are you Kiwi? I don't know. I'm hanging somewhere in between. But the national anthem definitely grabbed me. It got me, But before I go there, just quickly on racism. When I came, I was one of the few Indians in my school and in my area, and I faced some of it, And I've come to learn that darkness, evil, racism, things like that come at you with the goal of being birthed in you.
Yeah.
And I subtly started to become a racist towards the type of people that were coming at me, and I never realized it.
Wow.
And a decade, 15 years later, I start to realize, man, I subtly actually harbor hatred or bitterness towards you because of what these guys did to me when I was 11 years old, when I was 12 years old,
Wow.
And so racism, when people bring up racism, I think it's a very sensitive subject because I need to make sure that it hasn't become who I am now.
That's right.
Because I received it and it's seeking to be birthed in me. And I think that's true for all evil, even for, say, pedophilia or sexual abuse. Usually you see that predators were once the victims at one stage, and it's like evil tries to come at you to be birthed in you. And so what you're saying becomes very important, that actually the condition of my heart to make sure I've been purged of it, I've let it go before I can talk about it, becomes very important, I think.
Yeah.
But in terms of the national anthem, I was on a road trip with my family, my beautiful family, my wife and 3 girls. And we were on a long drive back. And somehow Cindy Hinepare Ruokere's rendition of the national anthem on my Spotify comes on. And I'm one of those guys that can't go to the national anthem without crying,
Yeah.
And so I'm listening to her sing this and I'm just getting wrecked in the car. My family's asleep and I'm getting wrecked. And it must have been on repeat like 5 times, And that national anthem, it carries something very powerful. So I am with you on that. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's amazing, because I remember being just recently down there in Lawrence, and I thought that the whole town would be like, it's about the national anthem. And I got to tell you, I went to the local museum, and they had to go around the back just to find a little card that told us about the story.
Wow.
Everything about gold mining. And I thought, so it was really interesting because I thought, well, so here's this national anthem, so powerful. And, many countries have said, this is the most God-centric national anthem they've ever seen in the world. It's really powerful. Actually, I'll tell you a little quick story. I was in Murupara, right? Another one of those, no one comes to Murupara.
Yeah.
And I remember that the kaumātua there, Papa Pembird, who used to be the president of the Maori Party. Anyway, he said to me, come and sit down. I said, oh, yes. Because when your kaumātua says, come and sit down, you sort of got to listen. And I said, oh, yes, Papa Pem. He said, okay, you need to tell me. Now, we know each other. But he said, when I stand up on the Paipai on the marae or anywhere else, I need to know, I need to be able to tell people who you are. So when people say they look at the Labour Party, that's for the working man. When people say they look at the National Party, that's for the businessman. But when they look at New Zealand, what are they going to say? And I thought, wow. And I'm doing one of those 0.001 second prayers. Help, Lord.
The good ones.
And then I just said, Papa Pem, I was just in Gisborne, and in a public meeting, this man said, if you become the Prime Minister, what will you do first? And I said, I'd sing the national anthem, all 6 verses, as a nation.
Wow.
And then he said, that's it. You see that national anthem? That's the most God-centric national anthem in the world. And he said, and that's what you have. God's in you. And you have to never let anyone take that away from you. And he said, always remember that. You're God-centric. And I just thought, wow.
That's so good.
Mm.
Well, we're now at 1 hour and 40. It's gone well. Guys, if you have any questions, this will be the time for you to throw them on here. Alfred is ready to go. This is who he is. And I think that's one of the things I really honor about you, Alfred, is that this is not just you having a message, you are the message. And I think that's very powerful and very evident, you know, that you're speaking life. Maybe quickly we can touch on New Zeal. Why New Zeal? What does zeal mean? Where did you get that name from? And how do you see that connected to the nation?
Yeah, so New Zeal means energy in pursuit of a cause. And I just love that sense. You know, it's a new energy. And the pursuit really is for a love for this nation and for its people, you know. And then, you know, from a faith perspective, there's been prophetic words that have been said over this nation. In 1921, you know, Rick Joyner, you know, had a prophetic word about new zeal coming into this nation. And you know, an amazing thing, Joseph, everywhere we go on and we hear different people, new zeal, this seems to emerge in people's prayers and people's sort of sense of people's believing that this is what God has for this nation, or just people just loving this word. You know, Isaiah chapter 9 verse 7 talks about the fact is that his government, God's government, there shall be no end, and the zeal of the Lord Almighty shall accomplish this. And so there's a sense that this order that's coming, you know, God's sense of order coming back in, you know, a set of values that would govern a nation and people's hearts, really. That's what it is, because that's where God governs. He governs the hearts of men. You know, and so out of that comes the values. And that's what the people say, out of the heart of a man comes the things that he loves and believes in. And so if you have a heart that has these values, then you will love the people and love the nation. That's what's really important. And that's the values that we have. And so that's where the New Zeal comes from. And so, yeah, and I have to say it's a name that has been birthed out of prayer, birthed out of prophetic words, birthed out of just out of the word. So yeah, it's God's name. That's what I probably want to say.
Yeah. So when you said prayer, I just got reminded, you know, obviously I'd like really commend your courage to be willing to stand up to things that don't line up with what you believe in, even when no one else will, you know. So a couple of things. First, actually, you stood up when the name of Jesus was taken out of the parliamentary prayer.
Yep.
And I heard you talk about the history of that, going back to the 1800s.
Yeah.
Maybe you can touch on that story a little bit and what happened in that case? Like what drove you there? What really caused you to be like, I'm going to stand up even if no one does?
Yeah, I mean, what happened in 2017, obviously a change of government. And in 2018, with the new Speaker of the House, Trevor Mallard, he decided to take the name of Jesus out of the parliamentary prayer. And yet that prayer had lasted for 165 years, as it was. And so I remember there were some people that came outside and said they wanted to put a petition to put the name back in again, name of Jesus back. But Trevor didn't want it. So they asked, is there any MP that will come out and speak out? So I came out and I said that, look, what he did was wrong. What the speaker did was wrong, to remove the name of Jesus from the prayer. As soon as I did that, I just had this real sense of God speaking into my heart, that I've chosen you for such a time as this, to uphold the name of Jesus as a banner for the nation and to be a watchman on the tower. And so for me, my faith journey, my assignment was actually then to be the best watchman on the tower, to understand the history and heritage of Parliament. So as I started to pray every morning when Parliament sat at 5 a.m. inside, outside, just praying for that, I began to learn the history and heritage. And out of that came the statement, the footprint of faith is deep right in this land. So Parliament began in 1854 on the 24th of May, and the very first debate was not about sheep, economics, or education, it was about prayer. And so they, debated for a couple of hours. And the prayer that they had, paraphrased, goes something like this: putting your personal and private interests aside. So when you pray, you're going there to serve. It's not about you. And serve the nation and serve the people. We beseech thee, that's that old English word to cry out for God, that you will give us divine guidance so that we may conduct the affairs of this house for the peace, prosperity, and welfare of the people. Wow. We honor the Queen and we pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. It was a prayer that was like an anchor stone. Helen Clark said, we don't have any formal religion. That wasn't true. We've had that for 165 years.
Wow.
And it was a Christian prayer. because it ended in Jesus' name. That's what makes it a Christian prayer. So therefore, the governance of a nation was founded on Christian principles. Right? And the prayer had a set of values. That meant it doesn't matter who you were, every time the parliament sat throughout that period of time, that prayer was prayed. It's like when you're talking about the United States, when people say, God bless America, right? They're declaring a blessing on America. Doesn't matter who you are,
Yep.
right? You don't have to be a believer. People still say it. God bless America, right?
That's right.
So when you pray a prayer, you're making a declaration. You're speaking a set of values into a nation. You're trying to remind the people when they're governing, they're governed by a set of values that are really important. So when that was taken out and I spoke out against it, it was one of the things that was a defining moment of my political career, because then I became a watchman on the tower. I began to sort of speak out against this. And I began to see that, and it started to arise in us, now understanding the power of this prayer. And from now, we started praying this prayer in Jesus' name. And I remember that we prayed for 72 hours of prayer during Intercessors Aotearoa. And one of the things that came up was actually praying, we felt the Lord saying, now pray for the Speaker of the House. And so we did. We prayed for the Speaker of the House. And it was prayed for the removal of the Speaker. Now we said, Lord, we're not the judge. We don't pray with a bias. But if it be your will, Daniel chapter 2, verse 21, then let it be so. And what it says in their prayer, Lord, you are the one who deposes and appoints kings. Well, after we prayed their prayer 72 hours for all the electorates, next Monday, 2 days later, the announcement that Trevor Mallard has resigned as the Speaker of the House. I said, okay, Lord, that's your will. And then we said, well, who should we pray to return? We prayed for Adrian Rudolph. He was about the third cab off the rank, shouldn't have been there, but he was the only National Labour MP who came out to receive the petition to put the name of Jesus back into the prayer. He became the Speaker of the House, and he still is.
Wow.
So that's the power of prayer. That's the power of us actually realizing that parliamentary prayer is significant to the governance of the nation. It goes back to one of the first questions you asked, right? The separation between, faith and politics. You can't. It upholds the values.
Yeah.
And if we don't have a set of values, then what do we have to guide us?
Yeah. So then what is this problem, right? When you have a faith that says love God with everything and love people just like that, when you have a faith that says there's no greater love than this, than you laying your life down for people, which I see you doing. When you have a faith that says be like your God, your King, Jesus, who came not to be served, but to serve. And you are living that out, and you are not overtly, actively trying to push people with some agenda. What is the problem? This sounds amazing to me.
Yeah, well, I think the problem is that it becomes uncomfortable for certain people. They used to call me the God botherer. I know, it's crazy, eh? I said to them, what do you mean by that? And I said, well, you're a God botherer. I said, what, have I bothered you? Have I turned around and said, you're a sinner going to hell? Have I turned around and tried to preach to you and really give you a hard time? And they said, no. I said, so, and your reasons for calling me that? They couldn't say anything. And I just feel that sometimes people's own consciousness begins to activate, and they begin to sort of not like what they're hearing. But more importantly, they don't like what they're seeing. Because it's like sweeping with the broom and making a cup of tea, right? No agenda, but just to serve. No agenda, but just to help, love, and care for people. When you get to know people who are inside the building of Parliament, the cleaners and so forth. No agenda, but to turn around, even as a minister, to turn around and say, what can you do to have better outcomes for the people in our community who are vulnerable? And what happens is that it becomes uncomfortable for people, because the truth is, what is the problem? Is there anything to be really afraid of, right? Would you rather have a person who's honest, who's caring, who's considerate, who's trustworthy, right? Who's respectful, who has integrity, who will be there to do the job? Or would you rather have the opposite?
Yes. Very, very good points. Man, love that. All right. So we got some questions going. I'm going to ask one that I have here. This is kind of a longer question. So Alfred, you just got to bear with me here. And then we'll go into some of the questions that have come up there. Okay. So this question is to do with the booklet, actually. I got sent this a little bit earlier. based on page 11 for the good of the country, where you write the current direction towards race-based legislation violates the principle of kotahitanga and unity. And the question is, the ideals behind the so-called race-based legislation reflect the hard facts that Maori and Pacific Islanders carry a much greater burden of disease and mortality at a younger age than New Zealand Europeans. Their average life expectancy is 5 to 7 years less than the New Zealand Pākehā. The New Zealand racism has contributed to this. You mention your values of nurturing and respect towards all New Zealanders. What are the practical ways that you envisage addressing the gap in health and well-being of Maori and Pacifica and others in the future?
So it's a long question, but a very good question, right?
Yeah.
And a very thoughtful question. So I just want to say thank you to the person who sent that through. The first thing, I used to be on the Auckland District Health Board, Community Public Health Advisory Committee. I was the chair of the Pacific Advisory Committee for the Auckland District Health Board. And so I totally understand the inequities of health for Maori and Pacific. We used to look at primary care as prevention as better than cure. And so NCDs, non-communicable diseases are a very real thing. They're killing our people. Diabetes, cardiovascular disease, obesity, critical issues of concern. What we found was this, is that when we just start looking at some of the, what they called race-based funding, so like for Māori and Pacifica, right, there was a certain percentage that they gave. I can tell you this now, it didn't make it any better. I can tell you that even though we had allocation around funding. For instance, things like, the highest population for smoking were Māori young teenagers. So we had programs around Māori, which was smoking cessation. It's around raising awareness and so forth. We did for all of those programs, it didn't make it any better. And so I started thinking and looking at that, okay, when I got into a governance position, so when I became the Minister of Pacific Peoples, here's what I started to say. I started saying this, if we could, the staff said to me, what's our KPIs? What's our key performance indicators? So the old governmental system is this. Here's our indicators, here's our deficits, here's our issues around inequities. And so we're now going to fix this by doing this, putting more medical practitioners, more healthcare in this, more funding for this. It didn't work. And so what I said to my staff was this, I want you to write this statement out. We need to articulate our cultural capital into a transaction. And they said to me, oh, what is that? And I said, well, for Māori and Pacifica, right, we got cultural capital. This is that strength-based approach. Let's look at it. What do we do best that nobody else knows how to do? And let's use that cultural capital as a way of engaging solutions to find, answers, not only for us, but for others. Now it lifts up our sights so that we can make a contribution, not just to serve the table, but to be serving from the table of decision-making. And so here's a good example. When we look at immunization for hepatitis B, do you know who was the largest ethnic group that were the most active? Was Pacifica and Māori.
Wow.
Mainly Pacifica. And the reasons why? The cultural capital was this. It's the ability to mobilize and motivate, right? So, for instance, in churches and community groups, right? Once leaders get up, cultural construct, right? This is what they had said. This is important for us. Immunization is important and would just happen. So the reasons why I'm saying, and we made that statement about race-based, because at the moment we're trapped in a cycle of doing the same thing over and over and over again without the result of doing anything better. Here's what the better is. Let's look at our cultural capital. Let's look at, for instance, what is it that Māori and Pacifica, that they do well, right? And use that cultural capital then to find a solution to address the issue. And I'll say this, then if you get locked in, because people say, oh, with race, it's Māori for Māori. Here's what I talk to other Māori. When you say Māori for Māori, then that's all it is. How about Māori for everyone else? I remember Rose Pere, who would turn around and say, she's passed now, but she said this, what's good for Māori is good for everyone. Tariana Turia said they're around whānau ora. Whānau ora was not meant to be just for Māori.
Wow.
It was meant to be for all family and whānau in this country. It isn't what it is now. But this is what happens when we get locked into a race-based, definition. So we're only going to do things for our people. We're only going to do things, to Māori, rather than saying, hey, why don't we stop for a minute? Let's say to Māori, Okay, what's your cultural capital?
Mm.
What is it that you have to offer that's God-given that no one else can do? Now let's articulate that. Once we articulate, now let's take the capital of it, in other words, the asset that we have, and then let's use that to transact change.
So good.
That's what we do. And I guarantee you, no one's talking about this.
That's
When you
right.
show me one person that is able to articulate just what I did then, right?
Yep.
And I'm not being prideful. I'm saying to you because I know that I've been made for this moment. It's been my time in the Auckland District Health Board. It's been my time in what you call primary care. It's been my time in governance. It's been my time in seeing things in government and in community. And then in there, I began to sort of, that's what the power of the broom is. Why? Because you pause to look, learn, and listen. And in that moment, you absorb like a sponge, and then you then are able to say, "Wow, I've found this sense of knowledge and understanding. Now let's put this into, a way of actually seeing action and seeing change happen." And so, to me, that's my answer to the question.
Boom. Cultural capital.
Yep.
That's going to become something here. Cultural capital.
Mm.
And when you talk about working with the people, working with the farmers, working with the parents, there is something there to be said with cultural capital. You get the best out of people when you work with them.
Mm.
So amazing. Love that. All right. So the other thing I just want to say in terms of God assignments, preparation is a big part of it. Training is a big part of it. And it's very evident that you have trained and you are ready for this moment,
Mm.
So it's very exciting. Just want to say I'm a bit pumped here sitting right next to you. Okay, so we got a couple more questions here. So how can we support you, Alfred, in the time leading up to the elections?
So, so one of the things I just want to encourage people with is that you can take our books. We've got a lot of them there. We're distributing them out to people. Go onto our website and begin to just encourage people to look at New Zealand. We've got a lot of social media that's out there at the moment as well.
Yeah.
And just encourage people to party vote for New Zealand because we believe that there's a movement that's so necessary and is beginning to shift and change. So please be encouraged. Tell everyone that you know. Guaranteed, because you're all popular people. If you look at your contact list, there's over 100 people that are on there, right?
Yeah.
Be annoying. Send them a text. Tell them to party vote New Zealand. Check out the website. Give them a phone call, right? And have a look at that. Be a champion for change. Be an activist, to let other people know.
I can't remember the last time somebody messaged me a heartfelt message about politics and who they're going to vote for. So, boom, there you go. People have the power, right? Next question. What's your stance on climate change? Seems like a solution looking for a problem.
Yeah, it is. I mean, so look, I believe in climate change. In a sense, climates change all the time. What I don't believe is all the hype around this climate emergency. The reality is that our global, carbon emissions are 0.17%.
Mm-hmm.
We're 80% renewable energy, and yet we've been made to feel like we're not doing enough. I just don't believe in it. I don't believe in what we call the climate activism. And why? The other reason I don't believe it is that it's putting pressure upon, again, the burden of blame that we're putting it on is to our farmers. We're saying that they're the dirty polluters. They're not doing enough. Well, did you know that at the moment, a friend of ours who runs the suicide prevention contract for the Ministry of Health, the number one client is Federated Farmers.
Wow.
Because, the suicide rate, just the way that farmers are feeling, it's not only the compliance and all the costs and extra work that goes into it, right? But now that people are made to feel like the villains, right? I mean, one farming family said that they never thought that they'd be made to feel like scum. So climate change is something that's real. We know that it happens all the time. But I don't believe in the climate emergency, the activism that's been created, that's creating more harm. The planet is not meant to be ahead of the people, right? They're meant to go hand in hand. And in fact, it's up to us. We were created to actually look after the planet, not the other way around. Yeah.
So just to play offense a little bit here, some people have mentioned that, okay, 0.17%, but when you look at it per capita, that's like a bigger deal. What's your answer to that?
Well, when they say per capita, what are they actually talking about? Because even if you break down the per capita, right, it's still the rate is minimal. It's very, very low. And then again, 80% renewable energy. if you look at the factors that what are our farmers doing at the moment, I mean, there's going to be an incredible amount of investment in research around making sure that farming is looking after the environment. You have to. And so why is it that we want to turn around and say that we need to do more when we're doing enough as it is? And I just don't buy into it. Look, you've got emeritus professor, Jeffrey Duff, who's retired now. He writes for NASA. He was at Auckland University. He's of the same opinion. Professor Ian Plimmer over in Australia. He's asked for any other scientist, any person, to challenge him with their facts and with his facts, and no one has. Why? Because the truth is that, again, it's the climate emergency and activism that we don't stand for.
Boom. All right. Would New Zealand support families who choose to homeschool regardless of the state of the education system?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've met some good people who've been raised, with have raised their children at home. And homeschooling is an option. You should always give that option. I just think that's important.
Yeah.
What I'm hearing, though, we just need to give some better support to those in the homeschools, access to resources and so forth. Yeah.
Yeah. And the last question on here, what are your thoughts on Agenda 2030?
Yeah, throw it out. I mean, it's just an agenda, and the thing is that we don't have to buy into that. But I can see that at the moment, there are a lot of issues, WF, the UN and so forth. There's just so many hidden agendas. And I just believe at the moment, and this is that social change, right? People are saying that we don't want this anymore. One of the things I saw was that we've got unelected officials making decisions for us in these places. A good example is Resolution 234 in the Security Council that happened, in 2018. It should never have happened. And 2016, and it happened. Why? Because we've got a policy in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade which allows at times for people like that to make decisions for us. So what does it mean? We're giving away our sovereignty. We don't have to do that. And 2030 is an agenda that's made up by other people. We just need to have, good people who've got courage to turn around and say, this is not what the nation wants. We don't need that. But I have to say this, at the moment, we're now in an incredible amount of debt, right? So we're going to pay it back. And so at the moment, there are going to be people who are going to be lobbying and leveraging to put pressure on us as a nation. Hence the reasons why let's start innovating. Let's start generating our own revenue. Let's become more independent as a nation while still having interdependent political relationships, diplomatic relationships. Because at the moment, I just feel that some of those decisions have sold us out. Yeah.
Oh. Well, there you have it, guys. We have just hit the 2-hour mark. I think it went pretty quick. We've had over 210 people plus this whole episode. So it's been great having you guys with us. I hope you've enjoyed this. I'd love to have gone into more subjects, and maybe that's something that will happen in the future. But this has been amazing for me. So I just want to say I honor you, Alfred Ngaro, for being the man that you are, what you carry, and who you represent. And, you have my vote and many other votes on here. And I'm really, really excited to see how the next 9 days go.
Yeah, look, thank you. Thank you, Joseph, and thanks for the opportunity. And to all our listeners that are out there, I just want to honor people for taking the time. This is a moment in history that I believe that we can make and will be making, and so, just looking forward to it and honored to have this time with you as well.
Awesome. Well, guys, remember to like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff, but pass this on. Let people see the heart of the man. That was kind of what I think just happened in the last couple of hours. You got to see the real man, which I think many politicians actually run from. So remember to share this around, and we're going to wrap this up. So I'm Joseph Wilson. This is the Fuse Life Podcast, episode 140 with Alfred Ngaro. And I'm looking forward to maybe one day doing this with you again as Prime Minister. See you guys.